Morning all, welcome to day 5 of the Waterline Summit. It is Cities and Built Environment Day. As you're probably aware, the Waterline Summit is brought to you by Marketing Humber alongside event partners, the University of Hull, Yorkshire Water, Orsted and the Yorkshire Energy Park, and for 2021, very appropriately, our COP26 partner is Zero Carbon Humber, and also thanks to the Aura Innovation Centre, which we are in today, and also a big thanks to sponsor for today, which is Hull City Council. So this session is very appropriately called the Regeneration Game. My name is John Till. I'm the founding director of Thinking Place, and I'm here to host the event, look after things, sort of, introduce fantastic speakers who are the heroes of today, facilitate a panel discussion. So for those who are online, and hopefully lots, you can ask as we go along in the Q&A box that you can access, and obviously for you who are in an audience, which is amazing, you'll be able to stick your mitt up later like we used to. So it's a real privilege for me to be hosting this. It's a bit like coming home for me. Hull has been a massive part of my life. It was my university city. I spent 7 years leading on the image and investment reputation of Hull and the wider area with City Image and City Build. I helped build on the fantastic bondholders that you're very aware of, which is a real exemplar, and as I work around the country, the number of people who know about the bondholders and how brilliant it is, and many places now are kind of benefiting from that. So I founded Thinking Place 15 years ago. We're a UK leader in place marketing, place making, and actually building on the work that I did here in Hull, which I'm incredibly proud of. So we reimagine places in the eyes of their stakeholders and create forward-looking narratives for place in as varied as everything from Gloucester to Harrogate, Wakefield, Hampshire, Surrey and lots of other places. And everything to do with place is incredibly vogue at the moment and very important for government. I came back as part of Thinking Place to help create Energy Estuary, that concept, which is fantastic to see that that is still alive and well. And I came back quite a lot during City of Culture, which, to be honest, was really quite an emotional experience for me. It felt like Hull had got its soul back, and just walking around and listening to the residents of Hull speak and be so proud of their place. Absolute game changer, and something that, you know, when I worked here, that was always the aim. And then there's the numerous conferences and events and everything. Hull seems to be so much on the map. And now, with this massively important leadership position on climate change, net zero, and global decarbonisation. 20 years ago, over 20 years ago, we created a narrative around Hull as a pioneering city. And why wouldn't you? You know, everything from its fishing, whaling, through to Wilberforce, Amy Johnson. But that pioneering narrative has never been truer than now. And it feels like Hull has got its sense of place really very clear, particularly with everything to do with what we're talking about today. So I spend my entire time in places. They're all facing a perfect storm, whether they like it or not. COVID, online shopping, changes in work, live that we don't know what are going to be, climate change, and resilience and sustainability in place are not just about technology, they're about people. And there's a considerable crossover to my work. You know, a strong place is also about growth, and it's about reset. And if I look at what we're talking to places about, which I think crosses over to this, about widening the leadership of place, about activating collaboration, about doing things differently, and really differently, not just reorganising the deck chairs. People in our places deserve nothing less than that reset. So in this session, we brought leaders from across built environment industries to look at how we can work collaboratively to ensure development and regeneration across the Humber is smart, is sustainable, and contributes to the economic growth of UK PLC. So I'm really looking forward to the session. First up, we've got Tom Bridges. Tom is Director of ARUP. He's the Yorkshire leader for Cities Advisory and Planning. He leads the firm's UK-wide advisory practice, an experienced professional in urban and regional policy, economic development, economic analysis, regeneration, planning and transport. I don't know what you do in your free time, Tom. But anyway, over to you.
Thanks, John. It's really great to be here and great to catch up with friends and indeed some colleagues in real life who I've only seen in 2 dimensions for the last couple of years. John, as you said, towns, cities, industrialised regions are facing this perfect storm, a storm that comprises of a series of really significant challenges: climate change, a pandemic, rapid economic and technological change. But these challenges are also opportunities. And I'll explain today how, if the Humber can rise to these challenges and demonstrate the innovation, the enterprise and creativity to overcome them, not only can the Humber improve its economy, improve the outcomes and lives of its people, it can gain global competitive advantage. Throughout history, people and businesses have been attracted to industrialised regions, to towns and cities, because of their natural resources, because of the transport communications they provide, and because of the densities of flows of knowledge and ideas that they offer. But these factors are now challenged. They're challenged by more severe weather, which particularly affects low-lying regions and coastal regions. They're challenged by climate change, which particularly affects places with carbon-intensive economies. And they're challenged by COVID-19 and the pandemic, which makes many of those factors that lead to urban density really difficult. So, at ARUP, we have the privilege of being able to work for clients and work in places around the world. We're a global firm. We've got 16,000 staff across the world, working last year in 143 countries with over 7,000 clients. We've been around for 75 years. We've celebrated our 75th anniversary this year. The firm was founded by someone called Sir Ove Arup, who was a real pioneer. He, in an act of huge generosity, he and the founding directors gave the firm to its staff members, and we remain owned by our staff in trust today. But I think if you think to when Arup was founded in the post-war period, we also faced huge challenges. The post-war rebuild, opportunities which came from huge technological change, the creation of the welfare state in the context of significant austerity. And I think we are at a similar time now, a similar pivotal moment. And I think in the Humber, what I'm seeing, and I'd agree with you, John, is I'm seeing a real sense of a mission and a real sense of civic and business leadership to try and rise to these challenges, probably in a way that I haven't seen before, and I think that's really positive. When we take a global perspective, we live in an urbanising world. 1.3 million people across the world move to cities every week. 20% but 20% of the world's metropolitan areas have actually shrunk since the turn of the century. We've got 33 megacities in the world with over 10 million people today, but in 10 years' time, that will be 43 megacities. But we're also have seen a decrease in urban density. So whilst cities and urban regions are getting larger in terms of population, they're also sprawling and becoming less sustainable. And I think there are 5 particular challenges that many places like the Humber are facing, and I'll quickly list them. The first one is decarbonisation. As we look ahead to COP, how we can achieve, not just how we can achieve net zero, but how we can achieve a fair and prosperous transition to net zero in a way that doesn't hit industrialised regions and doesn't hit the poorest hardest, I think is a huge challenge. Secondly, resilience. How can we, in a world where even if we limit temperature rises to 1.5 degrees, we're going to see more severe weather. We're going to see greater flood risk. We've already seen the challenges around resilience with a pandemic. We're currently seeing some of the challenges around resilience in the labour market because of economic shocks. So resilience will be a real priority for regions and towns and cities. Thirdly, rapid economic change and rapid technological change, which is leaving some people and places behind as the world changes at an ever-accelerating pace. And what's happening there is access to natural resources and access to physical communications are becoming less important, and intangibles such as knowledge, innovation, creativity, skills are becoming more important. Fourth, health and well-being. And the pandemic has laid bare and exacerbated some of the big health inequalities that were already existing and already widening. Average life expectancy in the Humber is below the national average. In Hull, it's 7 years below the national average. And if you are born in some parts of the Humber, you will live 10 years, as much as 10 years shorter life than in other areas. And finally, productivity and innovation. And in advanced Western economies in particular, we've seen a slowdown in productivity growth since 2008. And with rising wages, we will only raise living standards if we can increase the productivity and be better at creating the new knowledge, the new ideas, the new businesses that can help us succeed in the future. And when I look to the Humber, as I said, I see many people, many businesses, many civic organisations, universities stepping up to meet these challenges. There's a recognition that we're, as the UK's largest industrial emitter of carbon, 37% of the UK's emissions, that the Humber needs to take a lead in innovation, in investment, in decarbonising its industry, decarbonising its energy systems. And it's great to see the progress that's been made there. It's great to see the announcements earlier this week in terms of the hydrogen network. In resilience, we've been very proud to work with Hull as part of the Rockefeller Foundation 100 Resilient Cities initiative on a water resilience framework. Hull has been working alongside Rotterdam, Cape Town, Mexico City, Miami and Washington DC in demonstrating best practice and exploring the new solutions. Urban regeneration, responding to those economic changes. We've seen the first ever town deal developed in Grimsby. We're seeing some really fantastic town regeneration plans in places like Goole and Scunthorpe. In health and health innovation, Reckitt's global R&D facility, the great stuff that Smith & Nephew are doing in terms of wound care, Croda manufacturing components for mRNA vaccines near Goole. And more generally in innovation, a network of assets. This facility, C4DI, Catch, the proposed advanced manufacturing park in Scunthorpe, the new Siemens facilities in Hull and at Goole, which we're really pleased to be involved in. We're also seeing some fantastic progress there. So I think this creates an opportunity. The economist Mariano Mazzucato has written about how the moon shoot, the Apollo moon missions, created many spin-offs in terms of the wider economy in the US. And she has argued that we need a 21st century version of the moon shoot, focused on the UN Sustainable Development Goals. I think this creates a great opportunity for the Humber. If we can demonstrate innovation, if we can bring together entrepreneurs, innovators, investors, corporates, the public sector together to find solutions to these problems, that creates a fantastic opportunity to export those skills and export those capabilities globally. Something we do as Arup. We've drawn on the work that we've done in Hull on water resilience and exported that, undertaking drainage master plans for cities such as Shanghai. We've taken the work we did in Grimsby on the town deal and taken that globally around how we can regenerate coastal communities. I think that's the opportunity for the Humber. I think it will require us to build the momentum and build the partnership, to link some of these assets and projects together across the geography, and to think about, if you are an investor, an innovator, an entrepreneur, how do you access the ecosystem? What is your journey? But I think it's a really great opportunity. And I think if we can get it right, we can create, we can spin out, we can start up and scale up the businesses, we can attract investment, and we can improve the lives of the people of the Humber. We can regenerate our communities, and we can gain genuine global competitive advantage. So that's my call to action. I think there is a unique opportunity, and the time to act is now.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks, Tom. Very provoking. I'm sure that'll get some questions going later. We're going to move on to Valentin Quinio, analyst at Centre for Cities, which is a think tank whose aim is to help improve the economic performance of the largest cities and towns in the UK. She leads on all activities and research on environmental issues and has published 2 reports looking at the impact of toxic air on UK cities, and more recently on the role cities play in helping the UK meet its net zero agenda. Before Centre for Cities, Valentine held a research position at Cambridge University. We look forward to hearing what you have to say.
Thank you. Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here today. It's my first time in the house. I'm very happy to be here. So like John said, so I work at the Centre for Cities. So we're a think tank whose core aim is to help improve the performance of the 63 largest cities and towns in the UK. And here economic is sort of understood in its wider sense. So we work on transport, on devolution, on skills. And I worked on environmental issues and in particular on the role that cities will have to play in the net zero transition. So starting with where we are now and where the UK is now in terms of its transition to net zero for 2050. So looking at emissions, at least emissions which exclude consumption emissions, these since 1990 have halved, which is good news. But the remaining part of the challenge is likely to be a bit more difficult,
partly because it will involve cutting emissions in sectors which so far have seen very little progress. So the bulk of the cuts we've seen in the past 3 decades have been on shifting away from carbon-intensive energy sources like coal, for instance, but way less has been achieved on the transport and housing front. And these two together now account for more than 2/3 of carbon emissions in the UK. And so what you can see with the dark green line is that essentially, if we don't see any additional policy intervention, then it's very unlikely we'll meet net zero. So the question is, what needs to be done? And that was the sort of starting point of the research. And we know that some of that sort of transition will not have a particular place angle to it. So the switch to renewables, for instance, will hopefully happen everywhere in the country at the same pace. But some of it will have a place angle to it, and that's what we investigate in our research. And so this place angle to it essentially explains, well, is driven by the fact that emissions vary from one end of the country to the other, which is what you see on this map here at the sub-local authority level. And in particular, it explains why cities tend to have lower carbon emissions per head than the rest of the country. And that is explained by a specific sort of feature of cities' built environment, which is density. So density essentially means that humans' footprint on the natural world is lower, and it tends to encourage less carbon-intensive lifestyles. So taking transport, for instance, which is in purple on the 2-bar chart here, and where the gap between cities and the rest of the UK is the widest, in dense urban environments, distances are shorter, and so journeys can more easily be made either by walking, cycling, and active travel. And density also creates demand for public transport to be viable, and so that explains why in cities more people tend to use public transport. On housing, the gap is a bit more muted, and that's partly because housing quality plays a key role, and that's across cities and non-cities. But denser housing like flats or terrace houses also tend to be much more energy efficient and need less carbon. So this link between spatial footprint and carbon footprint essentially explains why we see also differences between places themselves. So here I took 2 examples in Oxford and Telford. So the 2 cities have a similar population size, but the sort of spatial layout of the cities is quite different. And Telford is much more spread out. So the built-up area in Telford is 63% larger than in Oxford. And the first table, so on the top, shows how that plays out in terms of how people get around the 2 cities. And you see that Oxford has a much higher share of people who either use public transport or active travel. Now, of course, the fact that Oxford is a student city explains why more people cycle, for instance. But the fact that it's a denser city also explains why more people use public transport. And in Telford, more people rely on their car. And the second table shows how that plays out on the housing stock as well. And you see that Telford has a much higher share of typical suburban, low-density, detached or semi-detached housing. And so these 2 elements combined explain why Telford's emissions per head are higher than in Oxford. And so essentially what that means is that in order to have a chance to meet net zero, we need to tap into the benefits of density. So the picture on the top left corner is a typical example of suburban low-density neighbourhood that's in Sunderland, I think. And the picture on the right is a denser neighbourhood in London. And the 2 screenshots at the bottom are the same areas, but each dot is a public transport stop. And the darker the blue, the higher the frequency. So that confirms that density doesn't just mean more public transport, but also more reliable public transport. And that confirms as well that low density tend to lock people and neighbourhood into car dependency. So that needs to change. And the reason why we've seen, many of essentially, low density development is partly because of the way we've been building houses in the past decades. And by density here, we don't necessarily mean, density like we see in Hong Kong, for instance, which is quite an extreme model of density. But when you compare UK cities to a number of European cities like Barcelona, like Paris, these are much denser, and they achieve density levels we can call gentle density levels. And we need to see more of that in the UK, and that means, building less houses on the outskirts in isolated car-dependent neighbourhoods. And this also has an impact on domestic emissions too. So the table at the top shows the difference in carbon emissions between new flats and new houses built in 2013 and 2019. And you see that despite this gap in terms of carbon emissions, in 2019, houses accounted for nearly 80% of old new build, and that was more than in 2013. So what needs to happen? What that means is that we need to, well, tap into the benefit of density to have a chance to meet net zero, and that means using spatial planning as a tool and a lever to get there. And so we need to see a change in the way we build houses, and planning the right types of homes in the right locations, so building more on brownfield land within existing built-up areas, near connected and existing public transport network, as opposed to building on the outskirts. And that will mean using tools like the local plans in which we allocate and identify land for development, and coordinating housing and transport within a single strategy. Now, we also need some specific interventions on the transport front, so moving away from car dependency and encouraging active travel and the use of low-carbon transport. But the key thing here is that this is unlikely to happen unless we change the way we manage and build our cities. And so taking the transport plan, which published in this summer, and it states an objective to have by 2030 at least half of journeys in towns and cities walked or cycled. Well, this is unlikely to be achieved unless we change the way cities are built. And then on housing, we'll need to prioritise development of compact, more energy-efficient housing stock, and upgrade the existing stock as well will be a big priority. So that was a sort of general overview on UK cities as a whole, but now just looking at what's happening in the Humber and the Yorkshire region. So these measures I just mentioned will take the region significantly closer to net zero. So the first chart on the left is the same as the one I showed before, but comparing Yorkshire and Humber cities to the average UK cities. And you see that emissions in the Yorkshire and Humber are slightly higher per head than in the average for UK cities. And that's not driven by actually having more industry, but that's also high emissions in the transport and housing front. And the chart on the right is a breakdown for a number of cities in the region. And as you can see, a number of places like Doncaster, like Wakefield or Leeds have particularly high transport emissions per head. And so this chart tells essentially, which lever will have to be pulled in different cities. In some places it's transport, others it's domestic emissions, which will take these places closer to their net zero objective. And finally, so meeting the net zero agenda will mean, on the one hand, mitigating risks, and on the other hand, seizing opportunities. So on the risk side, we know that many of the sort of national government intervention on switching away from coal, for instance, will have a specific impact on specific jobs and specific sectors which are at risk of being either lost or disrupted. And we know that this will not impact every places evenly. And a number of cities, so when you look at the cities and the share of jobs which are in these high-emitting industries, so that's manufacturing, that's oil and gas, that's mining, you see that, well, there's two things. The first is that most of these jobs are located in cities. And the second is that of the 10 cities which have the highest share of jobs in these industries, with the exception of Crawley, they're all in the North and the Midlands. And cities in the Yorkshire and Humber region are particularly affected. So places like Hull, like Wakefield, like Leeds tend to have quite a high share of these jobs in these industries. And so what that means is that they will require extra support and government intervention to protect these jobs or support these workers. And so that's investment in skills in particular to give them either upskilling or retraining and give them the tools to find employment in a greener economy. Now, on the brighter side, this transition to net zero will also bring considerable sort of opportunities. So I'm not sure why, but the cities don't appear on the chart on the right, but this looks at the share of houses which need to be retrofitted, so share of houses which are below EPC band C, and the share of people in the different cities that are low skilled. And so as you can see, essentially the places which need retrofit the most are the places where the skills gap is the biggest. And so these places will benefit the most from the job creation potential that retrofit will bring, in particular because construction, we know, is quite a labor-intensive sector. And so we need to seize this opportunity to create more jobs in the green economy, and the retrofit challenge is a good example of that. I'll stop here, and that's it for now, but I'll be happy to take questions later on. Thank you.
Thank you, Valentine. And now we're going to move on to Lizzie Wilkinson, who is Head of Domestic Product Management at Group Atlantic, UK and Republic of Ireland, responsible for future domestic product strategy, with 4 years there and prior experience in an international marketing role with Smith and Nephew. Lizzie enjoys working with a broad range of customers and bringing new products to market. Lizzie.
Hi everyone. So yes, I'm the Head of Domestic Product Management for Group Atlantic UK. You probably know us better as Ideal Heating. We're based on National Avenue in Hull, and we're one of the largest manufacturers of domestic gas boilers in the UK, which is why this is so relevant to us. So, sorry, my slides are not playing ball at all. So obviously we know that at the moment we are facing a significant challenge with climate change. We know that, as Valentine explained, houses and domestic properties play a large role in that. We know that 25% of the energy used in the UK is used in domestic dwellings, and subsequently 14% of emissions in the UK are from domestic dwellings as well. And just to put that into context, about 83% of properties in the UK are on the mains gas network and have a gas boiler, which is why we are very heavily invested in this. So, sorry, these slides have completely not worked. What we know is, sorry, I'll just talk. So what we know is that we're going to see policy, strategy and funding all combining to drive towards net zero. We see this in a range of ways. We actually had the heat and building strategy released, I think at 10 o'clock in the evening on Tuesday this week. So we have been reading all week. In this, we see a combination of funding and policy to drive change in the way that we heat our homes and provide domestic hot water. We already know that the new build is set towards a path for electrification, and that will really be driven through the Part L building regulations, which will be updated and implemented next year as an interim Part L, where we'll see a 31% reduction in carbon emissions targets from new homes. And then in 2025, we see the next iteration of Part L, the Future Home Standard, which will drive a 75 to 80% reduction in the carbon emissions targets for new homes. At that point, we will stop seeing fossil fuel appliances in new homes, and we'll see the mass market uptake of heat pumps into new build properties. When it comes to retrofitting, we're seeing a lot of activity from in the social housing sector. There's a lot of funding being provided as an opportunity in the social housing sector through things like the Social Housing Decarbonization Fund. And obviously local authorities are setting their own quite ambitious net zero targets as well, which impacts their social housing portfolio. When it comes to owner-occupied retrofit, what we would term the one-off segment, this is more of a challenge. We saw the government earlier this week release information around a boiler upgrade scheme to encourage early adopters with the uptake of air source heat pumps. And what the idea for that is that it will drive the market and the heat pump market. And there's also been announcements around innovation funds to drive the R&D of heat pumps in this country, to develop those products further to make them suitable for the UK market. So what will we actually see in terms of the future products that we use to provide heating and hot water in our homes? We see a real diversification of products. So at the moment, like I said, 83% of people have got a gas boiler. The majority of people in this room will have a gas boiler in their utility room, on their kitchen cupboard. They're easy to install. Everybody sort of knows them. It is a good way to heat your home. Unfortunately, the carbon emissions mean that we need a near total decarbonisation of UK housing stock to hit the 2050 target, so we need to find other solutions. And we'll see that through electrification. So with things like the increase in offshore wind and electricity becoming greener and coming from renewable sources, we see a drive towards electrification in buildings. So really in the source of things like air source heat pumps. We see a real potential in the green gases, so in hydrogen. I know there's a lot of work going on hydrogen in the Humber region. We see a real potential here, but this is a longer-term solution for domestic properties. The heat and building strategy earlier this week really indicated a heat pump first approach, and the hydrogen trials continue. And we also see an increase in heat networks. So this is district heating schemes and communal heating schemes with low carbon heat sources. So what does that mean for Ideal? At the moment, we make a huge amount of gas boilers in our factory on National Avenue. Well, for starters, we are still continuing work on our gas boiler portfolio. We currently manufacture some of the most efficient gas boilers on the market. We actually are the market leaders in the new build space, where they need the most efficient products, and our products go into all the major new build developers' properties. We continue to make those products more efficient through the development of controls, smart controls, connected controls, so that the appliances can operate in a more efficient manner. We also continue with development of, on our gas products in terms of hydrogen. So they can all run on a 20% blend of hydrogen at the moment, and we have an R&D program working on hydrogen-ready appliances as well. We also need to look at electrification. So we're in a very fortunate position. We're actually owned by a French private company called Groupe Atlantic. They're the market leaders in air source heat pumps in France and electric heating in Europe. So we have good access to that technology, but what we have right here in Hull through our R&D team and our fantastic team here is we've got expertise in UK heating and sort of UK installers and how UK households work. So we're really taking our expertise to combine it with that technological expertise from our parent company to bring these products to the market. So what about hydrogen? Everyone always asks me about hydrogen. I get asked about it all the time. What does it mean? Well, hydrogen is on paper, it's a fantastic solution for heating our homes. It's a gas. It could go down the existing gas network. It's a familiar solution. A hydrogen boiler and a natural gas boiler would be fairly similar. So for the homeowner, it's not a huge change. For our installers, it's not too much of a different skill to work on essentially a gas boiler. And also gas has a lot of positives around helping with capacity on the network, because you can store gas. And one of the unique things about domestic heating is you get large peaks in demand and spikes when like everybody gets home, puts their heating on, that kind of thing. So gas can really help to sort of buffer those peaks and troughs. So there is real potential, we feel, with hydrogen. We've been involved in a project called High Deploy, which started at the University of Kiel. It's a project around blending 20% hydrogen into the natural gas grid. So Kiel University has a private gas network, which is quite handy for studies like this. So initially, there was 20% hydrogen being put into the gas network at Kiel. All their properties, university buildings, houses were running on that 20% blend. We had one of our logic boilers running in the plant room on sort of speeded up life testing, so we simulated 10 years of usage. Sent it back to our R&D team. They couldn't tell the difference between that boiler and a boiler that had run on natural gas. And we're confident that our domestic boilers will run on a 20% blend of hydrogen. So we see that that could potentially be a good stepping stone. I think the numbers from High Deploy say that if you hit the button and put carbon emission and put hydrogen into the grid tomorrow at 20%, you would save, I think, 6 million tonnes of carbon, which is the equivalent of taking 2.5 million cars off the road. So that's a really good position to be in, but it's not the sort of total story with hydrogen. Obviously, we're looking at 100% hydrogen as well. So we're looking at developing hydrogen-ready boilers, and these are boilers that can be converted. They go out of the factory and they work on natural gas, and then they can be converted to hydrogen in the field at a later date. And there's a feeling within the industry that if these are released, maybe in about 2025, 2026, we could get 10 years of putting those into the field before hydrogen gets into the grid. I have to stress with hydrogen, there's still a lot of decisions to be made. There's a lot of trials ongoing. And at the moment, the government are very much not making a call on hydrogen until probably 25, 26, when it comes to 100%. So what's the other alternative? It's electrification, which is heat pumps. So we've recently launched our first air source heat pump. We've had them going into social housing properties. We've had them going into new build properties. Heat pumps are a really, really efficient technology. So if a gas boiler works at 92 to 94% efficiency, a heat pump works at 400 to 500% efficiency, because essentially a heat pump is using refrigerant to extract heat and energy from the air. So we're taking free energy from the air and we're turning it into hot water that can then go around our heating system or can heat a cylinder of domestic hot water. So we see that this is has real potential, and this is something that we're developing. We're developing our portfolio around these products as well. That's just an image of the product. You can see the outdoor fan unit there, which looks a little bit like an air conditioning unit. That's on the outside of the house. And then inside the property, you have the controls, you have the heat exchanger, and you have a domestic hot water cylinder. One thing that's really important to us is to really support our customers. Heat pumps are a different technology. They're a fantastic technology when they're used in the right application and in the right installation. And we need to make sure that people understand the technology and understand the products. So we're really working on making the products as easy to use and easy to interact with as possible. We're also working on upskilling the team that we have in Hull around customer service and technical support and all our engineers so that we can support installers in the field. And we're also really ramping up our training of installers. There is a skills gap in this area, and we're aiming to provide accredited training, so things like BPEC heat pump course, F-gas qualifications, to really upskill heating installers so that they feel confident in fitting this technology as well as gas boilers. So that's just a little summary of the type of work we're doing. I do apologise for the slides. I've no idea what happened to them. But thank you very much.
Lizzie, that was great. Don't worry about the slides. You got it all across. Let's move on to Alex Card. Alex is the Assistant Director of Economic Development and Regeneration at Hull City Council. He was previously the City Planning Manager leading on the first Strategic Flood Risk Assessment. A qualified town planner, he leads the Economic Development team within which he built the Flood team, a key reason for Hull becoming one of 5 international water resilient cities. He's also a board member of the Living with Water Partnership. Alex.
Thank you. Some interesting points around the building regs we heard there. Frustration that comes from me, it's great that it's changing. It's about a decade too late. When I came into heading up planning service within the city, we were supposed to be at level 6 Code for Sustainable Homes, which was pretty much zero carbon in 2016. So it's just an important fact to remember that a lot of this discussion we're hearing this week, this is the key decade. We've pretty much already lost a decade in terms of what we could do with new builds. So sorry, I've only got 10 minutes, so I can't spend too much on that. I think it's important to understand the journey that the city's been on and why actually we probably are seen as one of the cities that's really leading the way with climate change. And unfortunately, that starts with some pretty grim events back in 2007. I joined the City Council in 2006 from the Environment Agency, dealt a lot with flooding there, thought I'd come to the city, take the city forward, not deal with flooding a huge amount. What did I end up doing for probably the first 5 years? Dealing with flooding again. But to be fair, that's probably one of the key reasons why the city has got some quite unusual approaches to how it's managed things that have proved to be highly effective. Many will have seen these images, but I think what a lot of people often don't appreciate was in 2007, that was a surface water event, pure rainfall. Back in 2007, I remember speaking with the Environment Agency, we weren't even on their radar that we'd flooded because their systems didn't measure surface water events. They were getting it through to say, well, we understand there's a bit of surface water flooding in Hull. But at that time, we'd got riverbanks bursting all over the country, so their priority was sat there. So that was a bit of a reset of we can't respond to manage flooding in the same way that we typically would from a fluvial or a tidal event. But then in December 2013, obviously the Humber came in. Impact much less on the city as a whole, but it impacted some of our key city businesses around the English Street. Smith & Nephew were out of action for about 9 months and had to put secondary defences in response to that. What happened since then was we started the Environment Agency, through support from the City Council, Yorkshire Water, through funding up at North Bransholme, up at Kingswood, started to invest significantly in flood infrastructure. But that took quite a long time to actually deliver. So we've got the defences what they used to be like on the River Hull. works that's only completed last year. So there's quite a significant sort of time lag of the first events to then actually when the infrastructure comes forward. A lot of that was focused on understanding the risk effectively. There was no point in rushing just to build defences. You need to ensure that they were built so they've got the resilience to last at least a couple of decades. But with climate change coming, we're still not certain what that looks like for 2045, 2050 onwards. More investment will be needed. And we are looking at different schemes as well. So the conventional is you build your walls higher, you put some earth embankments in. Very unusual, this scheme upon Castle Hill, which is beside Holderness Drain. City Council, with money from the Highways England, now National Highways, the Environment Agency, stepped forward to create a just shy of £30 million flood storage area. Purchased 155 hectares of land from the Crown Estates that now sits with Hull and the East Riding, because the Holderness drains the border on the city. So a real important solution to work collectively to deliver that. And there's a planning application in at the moment around that. But in terms of some of the regeneration and the importance of what we do on climate change, is really evident with some of the targets we set ourselves within the city plan. So back in 2012, we've talked about skills. Obviously, higher levels of worklessness exist within the city than the national average. So we had a key objective of 7,500 jobs to be created. We've created over 10,000 jobs in that same sort of period. Number of projects, some of those have been delivered, many not. But actually, it was about setting a sense of ambition for the city. But then we had some really big numbers that were critical. So if we look at how much investment has gone into flood infrastructure, over 200 million already, and there's more in the pipeline. And I think it's no coincidence that led to then the £3 billion of investment. Private sector, public sector had got confidence that actually the city was taking this seriously. And I'm pretty certain if that 200 million hadn't come in, we wouldn't have seen the investment that we've seen in recent decades from the university, from Siemens, obviously from Smith & Nephew staying within the city. But also then we formed the Living with Water Partnership. And I know that's been touched on earlier on in the week, so I'm only going to briefly go over that shortly. Key investment, spent a lot of time securing Siemens into the city. So that was a £310 million investment that came in with them and ABP creating offshore wind blades. A key element of the Humber placing itself in a position where it can move and transition towards that clean energy solution. And the great news is, from securing that, they've already extended their facility twice. Now they've got a huge extension that's occurring at the moment, which will pretty much more than double the size of the facility. So another 183 million going in. So on one relatively small area within the city, you've got not far off £500 million of investment going into clean energy, and that's critical. Skills, essential. 98% of their workforce have a 30-minute drive time to their facility. So we talk about commuting being important. Actually, that's great. It's a local workforce. Hull, when we talked about density previously, we are the most dense city in Yorkshire and Humber. So again, that works to our sort of benefit. The university and Reckitt's here, key investment for them. So this was Reckitt's facility in the east of Hull. R&D facility that could have gone anywhere worldwide. We worked very, very closely with them to ensure that they stayed within the city and developed those links back into the university as well. So that therefore gives an opportunity for the students as they come through the unis, high skills, actually to stay local, which is a great asset. So I touched on the partnership that was formed back in 2018, a unique collaboration at the time with Yorkshire Water, the Environment Agency, Hull City Council and the East Riding of Yorkshire. And we've also got the whole university that have been brought into that. I think what a lot of people don't realise, it's not common for water companies to be able to sit down and engage in such a high-level strategic partnership to then help steer their investment plans. And that steered those plans to such an extent that a challenge that Yorkshire Water put in to Ofwat over the decision they raised. We then supported letters from our Chief Exec into the Competition and Markets Authority to say actually what they're wanting to do is the right thing. They need to invest more in the city, but that will have an implication on bills. But we need to look at things much more in a long term rather than just an affordability issue, which obviously is often driving a lot of political decisions. Well, then we declared the climate emergency. And don't worry too much about not being able to read the words on there, but a number of strands. And some of the key ones I'll just pick out. Innovation, skills, power. Now, power's the one where we've seen carbon emissions actually reduce significantly as we've transitioned to cleaner power options. There is still more we can do there, and as a city there may be some announcements early in the new year looking about how we're going to take an even further active step on that. But then mobility. Exactly right in terms of it's easier for cities to use other transport modes, but it's still a challenge. People still prefer the convenience of being able to jump in a car when they can jump in a car. So we need to continue investing in a low-carbon public transport alternatives. This shows the reduction that's already been achieved within the city, and it probably mirrors quite closely some of those national figures that we heard earlier. That is predominantly to do with energy, though. There's still a huge challenge of what we do with the industry and housing stock as we move forward. But also what we've started to do is acquire land. So it's difficult to tell on the scale on that, but the area at Castle Hill is 155 hectares. And then there's the lozenge type shape. That's a piece of land in the east of the city that used to be an ABP's ownership. We've acquired that for them with the key opportunity to use those in terms of carbon sequestration, biodiversity net gain, flood storage opportunities. But also we're one of the tree cities of the world as well. And that's because of the quantity of trees that we have been planting across the city. I know the local media will not make you think that, because every time we need to cut a tree down for whatever reason, it's like the city council don't care about trees. All the cities within the Northern Forest, we planted the most over the last 18 months. But also we have quite a unique policy in the local plan. Each house that's built, 3 trees are planted. But the challenge that we're dealing with on that is I remember sat there with the inspector and the house builders saying, no, we can't afford to do this. I said, it's 3 blooming trees. The cost of those are nothing. And that's just the economic strategy ties in with the importance of climate change and carbon sequestration. 3 themes: people, place and productivity. And then the importance of the university as we move forward is critical to work with those on that skills agenda. And then I thought I'd end on the City of Culture slide, because it is about us working as a collective with climate change and the response to that. There's certain things we can say and direct, but actually there's a lot of responsibility in the people within the city. Thank you.
Thanks, Alex. And it's great to bring that really back home to a lot of initiatives and change that are happening locally. We'll now move on to Cameron Wood. Cameron is junior consultant at Sewell Investments. He joined in 2020 after graduating from the University of Hull. His main interests lie in gaining an insight into the built environment, looking at the relationships between people, places and environments, and how to achieve inclusive and sustainable change. And he's been playing a role supporting the development team behind the Yorkshire Energy Park. Cameron.
Thanks, John, and good morning to everybody in the room and those watching wherever you are this morning. There's some movement on the slides, so I'll kick on with regardless with what's going on there. So I'm taking a bit of a different slant of what we've heard already. So I'm coming at this a bit of an angle of my journey of being a graduate in planning so far. So I come to you this morning from Sewell Estates, which is a collection of businesses as part of the Sewell Group. And we have a proud history of delivering a range of developments and funding solutions for the public and private sector. So traditionally, we're very much known as a construction set of businesses, but more recently have diversified into different areas and sectors, so from construction, facilities management, estates planning and investments. So within Sewell Estates, I primarily work with Shared Agenda, which is based on project management and consultancy. So we work closely with our partners to understand their ambitions and explore all estate management and development potential, often taking a problem or that very initial idea and converting it into a deliverable solution. And a lot of the work that we do provides adequate provision in the city for healthcare and education. And what we often find is that impacts quite positively on the economy as well for the region. Apologies. So there's the Seoul Estate slide. Okay. So I joined the group back in 2020, as John said, after graduating with a first-class honours degree from the University of Hull in human geography. So my knowledge and expertise from my degree focused on those relationships, often complex relationships between the people, places and environments, and including working out those challenges to real-world solutions like inequalities, whether that be environmental inequalities, economic inequalities, social deprivation, and how we incorporate that to achieve inclusive and sustainable change, often creating sustainable cities, urban environments, and collectively creating a sustainable future. So, starting as a graduate consultant, I've since been promoted to junior consultant, and I provide support on a range of projects from strategic estate planning to development. And I'll go into a little bit more about the project work a little later on. So, my first year has been quite heavily focused on personal and professional development, and that's been gained by very hands-on experience, very much thrown into the projects and learning on the job, but not without being able to gain those professional qualifications and further training. For example, I've become a better business case practitioner within my first year of joining, which helps many of our public sector clients and partners. And there's always been that opportunity to drive my career and training in the way that I want to. It's very much focused on my choice and the direction I want to go in, and that will continue. So I've always had an interest in the built environment and how developments work, and one of the best parts of my job is being able to shape places like the Humber Region, especially at such an interesting time. And another great thing is being able to listen to all the stakeholders on a project and being able to work out that solution that meets all of those needs. And the best part of our work with the public sector means we can help organisations like the NHS. So through the last year and 18 months with the pandemic, we're really proud, and I'm really proud of my job, that we can make an impact and help organisations like the NHS through a tough time. And I think that's a fundamental. You've got to be proud of your job, and you've got to be proud of the work that you do, and that's how you make a significant and positive difference. The Seoul Estate's work across the region means that I'm not fixed in one place, and we can get insight from other areas and business units looking at the same challenges but from a different perspective. So I love seeing projects right through to that end building, from that very initial idea. And our work in health and education means we can touch almost every part of society. And that means we're not just building and making things better for the people around us and future generations, but also ourselves. So we are personally invested in this, and I'm personally invested. We want the best healthcare and the best education in our region. One thing that the Waterline Summit focuses on and has focused on previously is the world's biggest threat being our region's biggest opportunity. And working for such a forward-thinking company that knows the local area and wants what's best for it is a great place to start, and we're at the heart of that on so many levels. So, why the Humber Region? Well, there's something quite interesting going on in the Humber Region right now. At a key turning point in climate change, the Humber Region is very much at the forefront with its geographical positioning, and that's why I've chosen to base myself here and work on some of its most significant projects. I think it's difficult to know exactly what you'd like to do after leaving university. You've spent 3 or 4 years learning that academic practice and very much the textbook. Whether you'll enjoy that practice in real life is something you can only know once you're doing it. And I can safely say there's nothing I'd rather be doing 18 months on and nowhere else I'd rather be doing it. So just a little bit more about Shared Agenda and our projects and a bit of what we do. So essentially we're a estates consultancy business working with clients nationally. We are technical and professional solution finders, supporting a range of public sector clients to find those sustainable estate solutions. And we're often presented with these unique challenges, such as climate change, as we've heard a lot about. So I'm actively involved in development, strategic planning, but there's lots of different areas that we focus on, from business case work, estate management, development management, and it's those different views coming together to solve the challenges that's really important. It's that collaboration and taking different views of the same issue that's how we solve this. And events like this, the Waterline Summit, and all of the events we've had this week, is so important because we've all got a different view of the world, but we're all trying to solve very similar challenges like climate change. So just thinking about some of those challenges that we have in planning with climate change. So we can plan for new buildings to come, new infrastructure, and that's almost a little bit easier because there's nothing there yet. where the challenges come is we've already got existing infrastructure in a state, and it's how we incorporate those new technologies that everybody's talked about this week and on this panel, especially like those with air source heat pumps, and introducing those into existing buildings. And that is a really big challenge, and we deliver estate management on behalf of £120 million health estate within Hull, and those are the challenges we're facing. You know, you've got the NHS aiming to get carbon net zero, and local authorities aiming for the same thing, but we need to translate that into actual doing to reach those targets. And other things like through modern methods of construction, where that's very much our job to try to change those things. To talk a bit about the project work, so there's a bit of a range up there, just focusing a little bit on primary care plan in the middle. A lot of you will recognise there the Jean Bishop Integrated Care Centre, which we helped design and develop, and that's a very place-based focus. So it's delivering a new model of care for 12,000 elderly and frail patients that have been identified by their GP have been at risk of going into hospital. So it's a clinically led team up there, and we've designed, as I say, we've designed that based on the place. So, you know, and we've talked a little bit about before about being this place-based approach. It's got to be like that. We are unique, and we've got to be meeting it to developing to our specific challenges in the region. Work with the Humber Coast and Vale ICS means that I'm doing work in the acute sector now, so looking at that service transformation and planning for the future, for big infrastructure, new hospitals, and working with some of the biggest trusts. Also, we can apply those skills to education, and some of the work I've done previously on pupil place planning has meant that we're now seeing extra capacity in schools. So some of these core 5 behaviours that live through everybody at our group means it's a really great place to work, and what actually is translated into a real practice of all those behaviours. We talk a lot about social value, which is and what we're trying to do is gain the most social value and economic impact on all the projects that we do. So from the environment, economy and society, we try to aim by minimum of changing £1 invested on the project into £3 of benefit. So as I say, through the environment, economy and society, whether that's training, providing opportunities, or making those positive environmental impacts. So the broad spanning disciplines of Sewell Estates means that we can contribute to these outputs positively on the environment, society and economy at every level through the investment, supply chain, consultancy, construction and then estate management once the building's complete. And that's fundamental. You know, we've got to be approaching this at every angle. So I'll wrap up there. So I hope you've had a bit of a valuable insight into what it's like as a role in planning. And what it's like joining such a diverse group of businesses fresh from university. So I joined Sewell Group on a graduate scheme, and that's allowed me to stand up here in front of you today, no matter how daunting the task. But we're always on the lookout for graduates. If you've got any questions about anything I've spoken about today, please do get in touch with my LinkedIn or email up there. I'm happy to talk about anything further. I'll pass back to John. Thank you.
Thanks, Cameron. Great to hear all that professionalism and that passion and that personal investment in the place, because it's going to need a lot like that to make a difference. So thank you to all the speakers. Great, and you were absolutely bob on time, which is fantastic when there's 5 of you, so well done. We're now moving on to the discussion and questions. So for those of you who are online, you can carry on typing into the Q&A facility. For those of you here, obviously, you can raise your hand and a roving mic will mysteriously appear. And so you can ask away now. We've got about 25 minutes, I think. So who wants to kick off?
Yeah, just a bit of a reality check, I suppose. I was interested in Valentine's point about the gap, well, the fact that Hull area has probably got the lowest skills in terms of retrofitting, but also the highest demand. And I think that's quite a serious gap. I know our colleges are doing what we can for it, but what I'd like to hear what the panel's solutions might be to that, and whether actually realistic solutions rather than just government hype on this particular thing.
Do you want me to cover off then? Right, yeah. Okay. So one bit I didn't touch on was any great detail around the skills. So we obviously have been working very closely with the UTC, and obviously some of the sponsors into the UTC are within that sort of, I suppose, the low carbon sort of arena. But also, away from the more specialist skills, is the colleges, which are going to be critical on this. So within my responsibility, we also have the council's in-house FE provider, Hull Training and Adult Education. What we're looking at increasingly now is how the demand for trades, which is still very high from a skill perspective, we start to evolve into those new technologies. So one, we can do that firsthand, there's our FE provision, but it's also then wider conversations that are going on with the other colleges across the city. It will take some time, but I think the recognition, and from what we've heard from sort of Ideal, it's quite clear as product changes, you've got to have those skills in place, so it starts to become a non-option, not to reskill. But I think the other interesting point is we've done a lot of recladding schemes, as you'll be aware of, across the city as well. So in terms of fabric first, that's also a real vital sort of component of ensuring how you heat your home, actually make sure it's not going out through the front walls. And because of our terrace stock, obviously that has been a really strong commitment we've made over the last decade. Tom?
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting question and has a wider applicability in terms of how do we help people respond to a rapidly changing economy where they may have to update their skills and retrain through their careers, but where there's a huge opportunity around green jobs as well. And we've been doing a bit of work actually advising the 101 towns that are benefiting from the government's Towns Fund on how they can rise to some of these challenges, particularly around higher level skills. And there are some sort of common factors for success, and it's not rocket science. Up-to-date, well-designed curriculums, genuine industry leadership, bespoke facilities, and real career pathways for people. I think there's some great examples in the Humber. I think Catch on the South Bank is a very good example. But I would add there's something else, and I was just reflecting on what Cameron was saying. I'm also a chartered town planner, perhaps further into my career, and perhaps a bit more jaded than yourself. But it was absolutely fantastic hearing your enthusiasm and your passion for town planning and urban regeneration as a career path. And I think there's a hearts and minds piece here as well. There's something about how do we raise awareness, raise enthusiasm and raise ambition amongst our young people about the exciting range of career opportunities that are going to exist in these industries. And we should also recognise that our current workforce in some of these industries is not a particularly diverse workforce. So actually the diversity question, how do we attract a more diverse range of people into some of these industries, is also, I would argue, critical in terms of addressing some of the skills shortages. But it's a really interesting topic, and I think one that's often overlooked.
Okay. Next one. Jonathan.
Thank you. Jonathan Oxley of the Humber Industrial Cluster Plan. We've got a fantastic lineup, and thank you to all the speakers. We've got those talking about developing, planning, measuring, regulating and heating properties in the city space. I just wondered if the panel could offer any thoughts about when and how we will get to a state where no new building is constructed without it being net zero, whether that's a commercial or a residential building.
Okay, who wants to start with that easy one?
Is that one for me? This has been a real frustration for me, obviously. That's why I said what I had to in my opening comments, which clearly I wasn't planning on doing. It does require that regulatory change. I've become really frustrated about how much planning can achieve on its own. Because I've tried to push things through which you're told, hold it, that's going to make development unviable. And the house builders are on the other side saying, well, we're not going to be able to build anything within the city. And when we're being told we've got to build more homes, you sat there going, well, OK, we can't ask for that then. So it's got to be made a requirement, which is the part L, the changes in terms of the building regs. That then is whether the timing around that's sufficient, because clearly the technology, and Lizzie may want to say something about how quickly the technology could evolve. But I think, unfortunately, we have no longer got the opportunity to keep nudging the sector. It's just, if that's what the sector's got to do, and that's what you've got, how you've got to build a new house, that drives down cost. It also gives the ability for companies involved in this sector to invest, because they know, actually, we can't keep building a more efficient gas boiler. We've got to go into something else. So I do think, unfortunately, I don't like to jump to regulation, but I think because of what's happened over the last, well, it's more than last decade, it's the last few decades, that's now essential.
Yeah, I mean, it will be driven by the regulation, and we are looking at the Future Home Standard landing in 2025 to really remove fossil fuels fully from new build domestic properties, absolutely. One thing that has happened in the building regulations is the tightening up of the transitional arrangement. So previously there was almost a bit of a loophole where developers could continue building for quite some time due to doing some significant land banking, sort of potentially, whereas this is actually in the interim Part L that will be introduced next year, and then in the Future Home Standard, that's been reduced to a year, and it's on a plot-by-plot basis, so it's much tighter. So we will see, and I agree, it's probably a bit late, but we will see this faster sort of implementation of those building regulations. In terms of the technology exists, and new build properties are the perfect properties to put an air source heat pump in, because you can build to the fabric standards that will allow the heat pump to work as efficiently as possible. It is a hearts and minds thing. I don't think it's just the developer saying, oh, cost. Some of it is definitely about consumer acceptance of the technology, and I know what some developers are very nervous of is people not understanding. I mean, people don't understand their heating systems anyway. It's people not understanding their heating system, and then getting a lot of, potentially people asking a lot of questions. Why, because when you run a heat pump, you run a low temperature heating system, so your radiators aren't super, super hot. It still heats the room because you size the radiators appropriately. Your room's still 21 degrees, but maybe you can't dry your pants on the radiator quite so well, so you get a lot more questions. And there's a lot of consumer communication, and I know we're doing a lot with our marketing to do almost myth busting around heat pumps and sort of normalising the technology a bit. But again, I think the new build is a good place for that, because if you're on a development and everybody's got a heat pump and you move into your new house and you've got a new washing machine and a new, burglar alarm and everything, then having a new heating system to get used to sort of always comes as part of the package as well. So the new build is definitely sort of what lends itself to that. I feel the real challenge is the retrofit and how we drive the retrofit, to be honest.
Yeah, Tom?
I mean, it's a great question, and of course, with commercial property and industrial property, there's a big interface with occupier behaviour there. And how people will use those properties, how their workforce will travel to them, which need to be factored in. There's also, it's one thing becoming net zero in operations, it's another thing, a whole new challenge, additional challenge in terms of embodied carbon, which is sort of an interesting question. We're doing quite a lot of work on timber buildings, for example. But what was really interesting listening to you talk, Valentine, is actually it's about the whole system. So it's actually about not just the quality of the buildings and the energy efficiency, but it's about density. It's about how they interact with the transport system. As Alex said, how it interacts with green and blue infrastructure. and so actually, all of which I think points to the benefit of a vision and planning, as Alex so eloquently laid out, at a sort of city and above city scale here.
Have we got any more? Yep, in the middle there.
I see some of the Samara, but a lot about the building. I think Tom just alluded to it, but the transport sector is an important one. So what do the panel think we need to do in terms of integrating the transport system to make it more user-friendly? Because until you do, the car will be king.
Alex, you love starting.
I see you look down and then pause on me. So it is a real challenge, and we're looking at it in a lot of detail within the city at the moment. The real conundrum in terms of there's some personal transport that is always going to be needed. So an element of that is trying to make that cleaner vehicles. So we're looking at EVs, how you put that charging infrastructure in place in a very dense city. Very easy in those suburban locations where everyone's got a private drive they can park on, but very, very difficult within Hull. So we're not going to go massively into on-street EV charging in every residential terrace street we've got, because it would just cause absolute chaos. But it is about the other alternatives as well. So I'm well aware we are looking at detail. We only have one park and ride coming into the city at the moment. So if you come in for the west, you can jump on that. But actually, it doesn't get you into the city any quicker than if you stay in your car, because it goes via the hospital. So in reality, if you're poor on time, which is what most people are when they're commuting in, you need something that's rapid. So we are starting to re-examine how we use our current park and ride and potential locations for additional park and ride facilities. As a dense city, there's obviously some benefits if we've heard around that, but actually we just haven't got the space to look at something in terms of what's been talked about in terms of tram systems, a modern monorail type system. There just isn't the space to get in and out and around the city to put that in. So it is a real challenge for us within a city. There may be different points others want to make about transport on a national scale, but we're examining it, but I have to say we haven't got to a solution at the moment.
I wonder if I could add on that. So I did my undergraduate dissertation on sustainable transport systems over in West Yorkshire, but I focused on socio-economics of it. And I think it's a bit wider than this, than focusing on the environment. The three pillars of sustainability, so the social, the economic and the environmental aspect, are all interlinked. So when we talk about transport systems and using public transport, there are blockers there. It's actually far simpler for more deprived areas to have a private car or van than it is to use the public transport systems, because of their access, not just geographical access to those public transport systems, but also the economic. It's how we actually approach that, I think, and it's whether we need to make public transport systems more accessible, although, completely understand the point, park and ride, and it is such a big topic is transport, but I think we can't forget the blockers to accessing other transport systems that are already there now when we look to the future of what transport looks like in a city.
Happy to jump on that as well. So when you look at on the transport front, when you look at the transport decarbonization strategy, which was published this July, it's interesting because there's a bit of a tension between sort of two competing objectives, and one is keep doing the same thing, keep flying, keep driving, we'll rely on technology, and EVs is part of that. And the other thing is actually we need to switch behaviours and, use more active travel and walk and cycle more. And I mean, my view on EVs is that essentially we need more electric vehicles, but we also need less cars. And so essentially, so when you look at EVs, for instance, we'll need to see a wider sort of, uptake in EVs and EV usage. So at the moment, I think there's about 24,000 charging points in the UK, and I think the Climate Change Committee sort of says we need by 2025 something like 150,000. So it's a huge challenge, and that also means that this will have a place angle to it. At the moment, I think a third of all public charging points are in London, And if you combine Manchester, Liverpool and Birmingham, it's below 5% of the whole stock in public charge points. But the point about EV is essentially that you know, we know that by 2030 we'll have this well phase out of petrol and diesel cars. But the problem is that we still need to switch earlier than that, because the cars that will be sold up until then will still be running after that date, and that will create more emissions. And the final thing about EVs is that essentially, even if they have no exhaust, first of all, they still well, they're not zero emissions because, well, they have no carbon emissions, but they still create pollution, in particular fine particulate matter, which is extremely harmful for the environment. And the other thing is that essentially, when you look at the government projections in terms of when the whole fleet will be electrified by what they think will be 2050, essentially that will mean more traffic because the cost of driving will be down. And the problem with that is that more traffic creates less space for active travel, walking, cycling, and sort of these other low carbon ways of getting around. And so, you know, EVs take the same space on road that a normal petrol car, and that is problematic. So we'll need to see a shift also towards more active travel and public transport.
Okay, I'm just keen to get as many in as possible. Yeah, over there. Thank you.
I had a question for Lizzie, but just a quick comment on the transport. I do a lot of biking around with a kiddie trailer on the back, and you've got those gates everywhere, which makes it absolutely impossible, and that's such a no-brainer to get rid of those, and they're still there. So quick solutions, easy wins. Lizzie, my question for you is on infrared heating, because we're talking about electrification of heating and air source heat pumps. Infrared is more popular in Europe, and I'm guessing Group Atlantic probably have some of it in Europe, but no one mentions it over here, and I'm wondering if it's on the agenda at all.
I have to say I've not heard it really mentioned over here. I think we may have some, but I'm really not an expert on that. I think I don't really know how it works or how efficient it is. I know there's definitely a move away from things like direct electric due to the fact that you're essentially 1-for-1 as opposed to a heat pump where you're at 300%, 400%, 500% efficiency. And when it comes to the amount of pressure that it's going to cause on the electric network, we need to make sure that we're using the most efficient technologies. So I think that's why air source heat pumps are really seen as the sort of go-to technology when it comes to electrification. It's due to the fact that it's the high efficiency of them as well that causes that, because obviously we need to find a way to make hot water as well as heating, and you can do both of those with an air source heat pump.
Okay, any more in the room? Yeah.
Hi, my name is Victor Azoka from University of Home. I'm an MSc engineering student, energy engineering. So my question is this: having a boiler that runs on a blend of 20% hydrogen or 100% hydrogen is very great, very, very great. But equally important is the source of this hydrogen, which we know that at the moment is mostly carbon-based. So the government has rolled out its plan to move to green hydrogen. So what is Group Atlantic doing to facilitate this shift towards green hydrogen? Because if you have a boiler that is running on hydrogen and the hydrogen is not green, I don't think that's, we have
No, exactly. I mean, we're not an energy provider, so we're not involved in the gas network, but we work very closely with the gas network, and I think that's the crux of why hydrogen, there's still a big question mark over it. So from our perspective, in terms of the appliance, the homeowner, and that element, we see hydrogen has massive potential. But at the moment, the reason it's still a relatively unknown as to whether it will be available for domestic heating is because of the sort of infrastructure needed in terms of both the creation of the hydrogen in a green or blue way, and then the rollout. But also, I think hydrogen has so many potentials. So because you have to make it and because we have to make it in a green or a blue way, hydrogen could be used in loads of different ways. So it could be used for heating, it could be used for heavy freight, it could be used for industry. And the question that the government have to answer over the next few years is, where is it best to point the capacity of clean hydrogen that we're going to have? Is that domestic heating, or is it somewhere else, or is it partially domestic heating? So I think that's why the question still exists. So we are pursuing an R&D pathway in terms of our appliances so that we are ready for that if it happens. We have to be. Obviously, we're very reliant on gas boilers, but that's also why we are developing our electric portfolio and our air source heat pumps as well, because even if we get to hydrogen for domestic heating, I don't think we'll get to the volume of gas boilers that we have today all running on hydrogen, because we'll have a greater mix of products out there. I think the government stats are saying that even in the scenario where we did go to hydrogen, the minimum amount of heat pumps they see being installed is this 600,000 a year by 2028, and that would be a minimum, even if there was some hydrogen in the grid as well. So I think there's a combination, but yeah, we're actively sort of speaking to the gas networks. Everyone knows that we need green and blue hydrogen, preferably green hydrogen, and we just need to be ready if and when it happens from an appliance perspective.
Jonathan?
Thank you. I'd love to add a comment to that. You're absolutely right about the different colours of hydrogen. In fact, they're evolving faster than I can keep track in terms of the rainbow spectrum of hydrogen. But just to add to that, so there are some processes where it is very difficult to electrify, and it may well be that we need to retain the option of using hydrogen there where there is no other alternative. As has just been identified by Lizzie, for domestic heating, for example, there are alternatives, but we do need to keep as many doors open as we can. So some of those alternatives might be around electrification. Some of them might also be adopting things like hydrogen, whether it's blue or green, for domestic heating, because, of course, don't forget about the billions of pounds we've invested in the gas mains infrastructure in this country, and not just the money, but all the embodied carbon. So if we simply swap everybody across to electric heating, we'll be sort of squandering, in a sense, all the embodied carbon in the networks. So it's a hugely complicated kind of issue to kind of balance all these factors up. But you're right to ask the question. And at the moment, we simply wouldn't have anything like the sort of green hydrogen that we would need to be able to power domestic heating, even if we were only putting 20% into the network. So there's something about using, for instance, blue hydrogen, which is manufactured again from methane, but where the carbon dioxide is actually captured, and using that to kind of build our understanding, build the market, and help to kind of work out what the forward plan might look like, so that ultimately we could transition some of those applications over to green hydrogen.
Okay, I'm just conscious of your time, and also the speakers have done a brilliant job of keeping to time, so I don't want to be the one that overruns. So I think just to draw that to a close, for me, who's not an expert in this area at all, the one bit it's reinforced is how incredibly complicated it is, and how so many factors rely on so many other factors. I think one of the elements that came out was about skills and how important that is, and how you can use some of the green opportunities. Are they being met through local employment and reskilling, and how that's working? And the other bit, of course, is we talk about regeneration, and there was a lot of bit about retrofit and retro this. We're operating in places, whether they're within a property or within an actual community, of course, that aren't always fit for purpose for this. So the sheer physicality of the place, I think, is quite a challenge. And that then gets you to technology. And sometimes, of course, and I think we've heard it, is having the technology is not enough, because it's about confidence, it's about culture change, it's about thinking and doing things differently. And, that isn't easy to do. And on the scale that we've got to do this, and I think we've heard, we're not into a tweaking situation, we're into transformational change. Well, how do you take a whole country on a transformational change agenda, when they don't perhaps even understand it? And as has been said, I don't operate the heating at home because I haven't got a bloody clue, right? So I'm going to need quite a lot of communication, and I guess I'm not alone, to understand what the possibilities are. So I just want to say a big thank you to the speakers, to our sponsors, Hull City Council. The next event is hosted by Arup, which is building a resilient Humber, a sustainable future for the UK's energy estuary. You can check out the fringe events on the event hub. And on there are streamed events, and you can also visit that hub during COP26, so you can catch up with the Humber presence. So I want to thank all of you, all of the probably millions that were watching online, right, who couldn't come, and just have a great rest of the day. Thank you.